The bass thrummed through the soles of Elena Torres's feet as she navigated between tables draped in midnight blue velvet. Ice clinked in crystal glasses, and
Please,
laughter
you
sharp.
have to help me.
Expensive laughter cut through the layers of jazz floating from the band in the corner. The Sapphire Room lived up to its name after sunset, all low purple lighting and shadows that made everything feel like a secret. Elena balanced a tray of champagne flutes, her smile fixed in place like a mask she'd learned to wear 6 months ago when desperation had driven her through these doors. 24 years old, and she'd become an expert at invisible labor refilling glasses before they emptied.
We have to find a way.
Summoned,
Let's look at the
when
numbers
dismissed.
again.
Hey, sweetheart. A man in a gray suit grabbed her wrist as she passed. His cologne was suffocating. How about you sit down for a drink? I'm working, sir. Elena kept her voice pleasant, professional. She'd learned that tone too warm enough to avoid offense, cold enough to discourage pursuit. He released her with a chuckle that suggested he didn't believe her refusal was real, just part of some game. Elena moved away quickly, her heart rate settling only when she reached the service bar. Table 12 needs another bottle of the Armand de Brignac, she told Marcus, the bartender, a man in his 50s who'd worked at the Sapphire Room longer than anyone else. That's their third. Marcus raised an eyebrow but reached for the gold bottle anyway. Big spenders tonight. Elena glanced at the table, 4 men in expensive suits, their conversation intense, hands gesturing in tight, controlled movements. She'd learned not to listen too carefully to what was said at the Sapphire Room. The less you knew, the safer you were. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, stepping into the narrow hallway that led to the restrooms. The screen showed Mercy General Hospital. His stomach dropped. Miss Torres? The nurse's voice was professionally calm, which somehow made it worse. Your mother's condition has changed. The doctor would like to discuss treatment options with you as soon as possible. Treatment options. Code for more money she didn't have. I'll be there first thing in the morning, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. Is she stable right now? For now. But Miss Torres, these decisions can't wait much longer. After the call ended, Elena leaned against the wall, pressing her palm against the cool surface. Her mother had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim, but there were experimental treatments, expensive treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Treatments that cost more than Elena made in a year. That's why she was here, in this club that everyone knew was owned by people who didn't earn their money through legitimate means. The Sapphire Room paid double what other clubs offered, asked no questions about your background, and operated with the kind of efficiency that suggested consequences for failure. Torres. Gregory Marsh, the floor manager, appeared at the end of the hallway. He was a compact man with slicked back hair and a permanent expression of irritation. What are you doing back here? Table 7 needs service. Elena pocketed her phone and returned to the floor, her smile sliding back into place. What she didn't know was that 3 stories above, behind a wall of bulletproof glass, someone had noticed her phone call, had seen her lean against that wall, had observed the exact moment her mask slipped, and the fear showed through. Luciano De Luca stood in his private office overlooking the club floor. The space was decorated in dark wood and leather, with monitors showing different angles of the Sapphire Room below. He held a glass of whiskey, but hadn't touched it in 20 minutes. His attention was focused on one particular screen. The girl with the dark hair pulled into a practical bun, moving through the crowd with efficient grace. Elena Torres. He'd noticed her the second week she'd worked here, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she moved differently than the other servers. She didn't flirt with customers, didn't angle for tips with lowered eyelashes and bright smiles. She worked with the focused determination of someone who needed every dollar. He'd had his people look into her. Single mother in hospice care, no father in the picture. Student loans from a bachelor's degree in social work that she'd never been able to use because life had gotten in the way. No criminal record, no connections to any of the families or organizations that operated in Verona Bay's underworld. Clean, dangerously clean in a world where everyone had dirt under their nails. Why do you keep watching her? Luciano didn't turn. His second in command, Vincent Calabrese, had entered the office soundlessly, a skill developed over 20 years of working in the shadows. She's a liability, Luciano said, which was true but not the whole truth. Vincent moved to stand beside him, looking at the monitors. She's a waitress. She notices things. Luciano gestured to a screen showing Elena observing the men at table 12. Watch her eyes. She's reading them, assessing threat levels without realizing she's doing it. So fire her. Luciano took a sip of his whiskey, the liquid burning down his throat. No, I have a better idea. On the monitor, Elena disappeared into the kitchen. Luciano turned away from the screens, moving to his desk where a manila folder lay open. Inside were details of Elena's life, every debt, every desperate decision, every pressure point. He'd built an empire by understanding leverage. And Elena Torres, whether she knew it or not, was about to become his. The club closed at 3 a.m. By 3:30, Elena had finished her side work wiping down tables, restocking the bar, counting out her tips, $247. Good night, but not good enough. Never good enough. She was heading toward the staff exit, her feet aching in the black heels she'd bought secondhand, when a figure stepped into her path. The man was built like a wall, 6.5 feet of muscle, in a perfectly tailored black suit. Elena had seen him around the club, but never up close. He wore an earpiece and had the kind of watchful stillness that marked him as security. High-level security. Miss Torres. His voice was surprisingly soft. Mr. DeLuca would like to see you. Elena's first thought was that she was being fired. Her second thought was wondering what she'd done wrong. Now? It's almost 4 a.m. Now. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. Elena followed him through the club, her mind racing. Maybe someone had complained about her service. Maybe she'd overheard something she shouldn't have. Maybe. The security guard led her to a private elevator she'd never noticed before, hidden behind a panel in the wall near the VIP section. Inside, he pressed a button marked only with the letter P. Am I in trouble? Elena asked as the elevator rose smoothly. The guard didn't answer. The elevator opened directly into an office that looked nothing like the club below. Where the sapphire room was all purple lighting and calculated glamour, this space was austere, dark hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Verona Bay's glittering skyline, and furniture that whispered old money, rather than shouting new wealth. A man stood at the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. He turned as Elena stepped out of the elevator. Luciano DeLuca was not what she expected. She'd imagined someone older, harder. The man before her looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair styled back from a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting, all sharp angles and classical proportions. He wore a black suit with no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch. Dark and utterly calm, like deep water with nothing stirring beneath the surface. Miss Torres. He didn't smile. Thank you for joining me. Please, sit. He gestured to a leather chair positioned in front of his desk. Elena sat, hyper-aware of the security guard still standing by the elevator, of the way this office felt hermetically sealed from the rest of the world. Luciano moved to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he remained standing, looking down at her with that unsettling calm. You've worked here for 6 months, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. You're always on time. Never call in sick. Your customer complaint record is spotless. He picked up a file from his desk, opened it. Your mother is Anna Torres, age 53, currently at Mercy General Hospital. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Prognosis: 6 to 8 months without experimental treatment. With treatment, possibly 18 months to 2 years. Elena's blood went cold. How do you? You owe $68,000 in student loans. Your rent is 4 months overdue. Your landlord hasn't evicted you yet, only because his wife is sympathetic to your situation. You work here 3 nights a week, and at a coffee shop 4 mornings a week. You sleep approximately 4 hours a night. He closed the file, set it down, and finally sat, lacing his fingers on the desk. Would you like to know how I know these things? Or would you prefer I get to the point? Elena's hands gripped the arms of the chair. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the security guard blocked the only exit. And besides, where would she go? This man clearly had resources she couldn't imagine. The point, she managed. For the first time, something shifted in Luciano's expression, a slight curve at the corner of his mouth that might have been approval. I need someone I can trust. That's rare in my world. Most people who work for me are either compromised by their own greed or embedded with someone else's interests. I don't understand what this has to do with me. You're clean. He said it like it was a valuable commodity. No connections to any organizations, no criminal record, no hidden allegiances, and you're desperate. Desperate people are predictable. They do what's necessary to protect what they love. Elena's throat tightened. What are you offering? I want you to work as my personal assistant. The position pays $15,000 a month. Your mother's medical bills, all of them, including the experimental treatment, will be covered through a private fund I maintain. You'll also receive a housing stipend and health insurance. The numbers were staggering, more than she could make in a year of double shifts. What would I have to do? Manage my schedule, handle correspondence, accompany me to meetings, ensure my life runs smoothly. His eyes never left hers. And tell no one the nature of my business dealings. I don't know anything about your business dealings. Good. Let's keep it that way. He slid an envelope across the desk. Inside is a contract and a check for your first month's salary. There's also information about the medical facility where your mother will be transferred. It's private, specialized in oncology, among the best in the country. Elena stared at the envelope like it might contain a coiled snake. Why me? You could hire someone more qualified. Because someone more qualified would have questions. They'd want to understand the source of my wealth, the nature of my connections. They'd be curious. Luciano leaned back in his chair. You, Miss Torres, have something much more valuable than curiosity. You have a reason to look the other way. It was the most honest explanation she'd heard in months. No pretense of charity, no false promises, just a cold assessment of mutual benefit. I need to think about it, Elena said. No, you don't. Luciano's voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath it. Your mother has weeks, maybe days, before her condition deteriorates beyond help. The experimental treatment requires beginning immediately. You need money you don't have, and I'm offering it. There's nothing to think about. He was right. God help her, he was right. Elena reached for the envelope with shaking hands. Elena's apartment was a studio in a building where the heat worked sporadically, and the neighbors' arguments bled through thin walls. She sat on her second-hand couch, the cushions sagging from years of use by previous owners, and stared at the contents of Luciano's envelope spread across her coffee table. The contract was surprisingly straightforward. Employment agreement, non-disclosure clauses, compensation structure. No mention of anything illegal, no obvious trap. Just clean, professional language that bound her to someone she knew was dangerous. The check was real. She'd verified it 3 times. $15,000, drawn on an account from a bank that catered to the kind of wealth Elena had only seen from a distance. Her phone rang. Her mother's name appeared on the screen. Mija. Her mother's voice was thin, reedy. It's late. Why are you still awake? Elena looked at the contract, the check, the information packet about the medical facility. I got a new job. That's wonderful, honey. Doing what? Assistant work. For a businessman. There was a pause. Her mother knew her too well. What kind of businessman? The kind who doesn't ask questions about my background. Elena closed her eyes. And who can afford your treatment? Another pause, longer this time. When her mother spoke again, her voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. Elena, there are some prices that are too high, not higher than losing you. You don't know what you're trading away. I know exactly what I'm trading. Elena opened her eyes, looked at the contract. My time, my discretion. That's all. I can do this, Mama. Can you live with it? The question hung in the air between them. Elena thought about the club, about the men at table 12 with their intense conversations and controlled gestures, about Luciano De Luca standing at his window overlooking a city he probably owned in ways that would never appear in public records. I'll figure it out, Elena said, which wasn't an answer but was all she had. After they hung up, Elena signed the contract. Her signature looked small and shaky at the bottom of the page, a capitulation rendered in blue ink. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Elena presented herself at the address printed on the business card Luciano had included. The building was in Verona Bay's financial district, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. The lobby had the hushed elegance of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. At the reception desk, she gave her name. The woman behind the counter, perfectly groomed, with the kind of professional warmth that was probably learned in hospitality school, made a quick call, then directed Elena to the executive elevators. Penthouse level, she said with a smile that revealed nothing. The elevator was empty, save for Elena and her reflection in the mirrored walls. She looked small, out of place in her best work clothes. A black dress she'd bought for job interviews that had never materialized, and a blazer with buttons she'd replaced herself when the originals fell off. The penthouse level opened not into a hallway but directly into a space that stole her breath. The entire floor was one massive apartment floor to ceiling windows on all sides, offering a 360-degree view of Verona Bay. The furnishings were minimal but expensive. Leather furniture in dark colors, modern art on the walls, surfaces so clean they looked untouched. Luciano stood near the windows, speaking on the phone in rapid Italian. He saw her and held up one finger. Wait. Elena waited, taking in the space. This was someone's home, she realized. This was where Luciano De Luca lived. He ended the call and pocketed his phone, turning to face her. In daylight, filtered through those massive windows, he looked different, younger, or perhaps just more real. Last night he'd been a figure of power in a dark office. Now he was a man in jeans and a white button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Good, he said, as if her arrival confirmed something. You signed. I signed. Any questions about the contract? About 1,000, Elena thought. When do I start? Now. He moved to a door she hadn't noticed, opened it. This is your room. You'll live here Monday through Friday. Weekends are yours unless I need you for specific events. Elena stepped into the room and felt her breath catch for the second time that morning. It was easily twice the size of her studio apartment. A king bed with white linens, a sitting area with a couch and television, a desk positioned near windows that overlooked the bay. Through another door, she glimpsed a bathroom with marble counters. I can't, she started. You can, and you will. Luciano's tone left no room for argument. I need you available at irregular hours. This is practical, not generous. He handed her a new phone, still in its box. Your personal phone will stay here. Use this for all communication. My number is already programmed. Vincent's number is there as well. He's my second. If you can't reach me, reach him. Elena took the phone with numb fingers. What about my apartment? I've arranged for your things to be moved. You'll maintain the apartment for weekends if you wish, or I can find you something better. He checked his watch. Elena glimpsed a flash of gold. Understated but undoubtedly expensive. You have 1 hour to settle in. Then we have a meeting downtown. He left, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Elena stood alone in the beautiful room, in the beautiful apartment, in the beautiful cage she'd just locked herself inside. She thought about her mother's question. Can you live with it? The answer, she was beginning to realize, didn't matter. She'd already chosen. The meeting downtown was at a law firm whose name Elena recognized from billboards: Hendricks, Stone, and Associates, the kind of lawyers who wore suits worth more than cars. Luciano moved through the polished lobby with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere he went, and Elena followed in his wake, hyper-aware of the eyes tracking them. In the elevator, he briefed her without looking up from his phone. We're reviewing acquisition contracts. Take notes on timeline concerns and financial contingencies. Don't speak unless I ask you a direct question. The meeting room was all dark wood and leather chairs. 3 lawyers, 2 men and a woman stood as they entered. Elena saw the subtle recalibration in their expressions when they looked at Luciano. Respect mixed with wariness. For the next 2 hours, Elena took notes on her new phone while contracts were discussed in language so dense with legal terminology it might as well have been a foreign language. But she caught the essentials. Luciano was buying a shipping company. The transaction was complicated, involving multiple subsidiaries and offshore accounts. She noticed how the lawyers never quite met Luciano's eyes, how they phrased concerns as questions rather than statements, how the woman, the most senior partner, based on how the others deferred to her, touched her pearl necklace whenever Luciano disagreed with a proposed clause. These were people accustomed to power, and they were afraid. After the meeting, in the car Vincent drove through downtown traffic, Luciano turned to her. Observations? Elena hesitated. They're worried about the origin of the funds. Good. What else? The woman, Miss Hendricks. She pushed back on the timeline but folded when you mentioned preferring to work with Simons and Burke instead. Elena glanced at her notes. Is Simons and Burke a competitor? No, they don't exist. A ghost of a smile crossed Luciano's face, but she doesn't know that. Power, Miss Torres, is often just the willingness to bluff convincingly. Vincent caught her eye in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. Over the following weeks, Elena learned the architecture of Luciano's world. His legitimate businesses, real estate holdings, restaurants, the Sapphire Room were fronts for enterprises that operated in shadows. Money moved through complex networks, emerging clean on the other side. People came to the penthouse at odd hours, always escorted by Vincent, always leaving with either satisfaction or fear in their eyes. Luciano ran his empire with meticulous attention. Every decision was calculated, every relationship mapped. He trusted no one fully, which Elena supposed made sense when trust could be a fatal weakness. Her role evolved quickly. She managed his calendar, screened his calls, accompanied him to meetings where her job was to observe and remember. She became a fixture in his life, present but peripheral, like expensive furniture. He was unfailingly polite, never raised his voice, never touched her except for the occasional guiding hand at her back when they navigated crowded rooms. But Elena felt the control in every interaction, the way he dictated her schedule, monitored her movements, shaped her days around his needs. "You're adapting well," he said one evening. They were in his office at the penthouse, him behind the desk, her in the chair across from him, reviewing the next week's appointments. "Thank you. Your mother was moved to the facility yesterday. The doctors are optimistic about the treatment protocol." Elena's hands stilled on her phone. She hadn't told him the transfer was yesterday. "How did you—" "I'm kept informed of anything that affects people in my employ." His tone was matter of fact. "Your mother's health affects you, which affects your performance. It's practical, not invasive, but it was invasive." He knew the details of her life before she did, maintained surveillance she couldn't detect, controlled outcomes without being present. "I'd like to visit her this weekend," Elena said carefully. "Of course. Vincent will drive you. I can take the train." "Vincent will drive you." Luciano set down his pen, finally looking at her directly. "You're valuable to me, Miss Torres. Valuable things are protected." Protected. The word could mean so many things. That night, alone in her beautiful room, Elena stood at the window overlooking the bay. The city lights reflected off the water, and somewhere out there was the hospital where her mother lay, receiving treatment that was saving her life. The price for that treatment was Elena's freedom. Not in any violent or crude way. Luciano never threatened her, never seemed angry. But she felt the golden cage tightening nonetheless, felt herself becoming part of the machinery of his world. She thought about escape, about taking her mother and running. But running required resources she didn't have, and Luciano had made it clear, made it devastatingly clear without ever saying so explicitly that leaving wasn't really an option. She knew too much now. She'd seen the faces in those late-night meetings, heard names that carried weight in Verona Bay's underworld. You don't walk away from the Mafia. You don't walk away from Luciano De Luca. The door to her room opened without a knock. Elena turned, startled, to find Luciano standing in the doorway. He'd changed from his business clothes into dark slacks and a black t-shirt. It was the most casual she'd seen him. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Just thinking." He moved into the room, and Elena was suddenly aware of how intimate this space was. Her space, her bedroom, with him in it. But he simply walked to the window, standing beside her to look out at the same view. "What are you thinking about?" The truth came out before she could stop it. "Whether I made the right choice." "You made the only choice." His voice was gentle but firm. "That's different from the right choice, but it's what you had available. Do you ever regret your choices?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Every day. But regret is expensive, Miss Torres. I prefer to spend my resources elsewhere, like buying shipping companies and people's lives." She expected anger, but Luciano simply nodded. "Yes, exactly like that." He turned to face her, and in the dim light from the city below, his face was all shadows and sharp lines. "You think I'm a monster. I think you're dangerous." "Good. You should." He moved closer, not threatening, but deliberate. "But monsters, Miss Torres, are at least honest about what they are. It's the people who pretend to be civilized while committing the same sins that you should truly fear." He left then, the door closing softly behind him. Elena stood at the window for a long time afterward, her reflection ghostly in the glass, wondering if she'd just been warned or comforted or both. 3 months into her employment, Luciano informed Elena that she would accompany him to dinner at his estate, not the penthouse, his actual home, outside the city. Vincent drove them north along the coast as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rust. The estate sat on a cliff overlooking the ocean, accessible only by a private road that wound through dense woods. When the house came into view, Elena understood why Luciano lived in the city penthouse most of the time. This wasn't a place for conducting business. This was a fortress. The main house was stone and glass modern architecture balanced against old-world security. High walls, cameras tucked discreetly into the eaves, guards positioned at intervals that looked random but surely weren't. Inside, the decor was sparse, almost austere. No photographs, No personal touches, just expensive furniture and art that looked museum quality. A house that revealed nothing about its owner. Dinner was prepared by a private chef, a woman named Rosa who greeted Luciano in Italian and looked at Elena with frank curiosity. They ate on a terrace overlooking the ocean, the sound of waves providing a constant backdrop. "Why am I here?" Elena asked after they'd eaten in near silence for 20 minutes. Luciano set down his wine glass. "Because I wanted you to see where I come from. This house? This life." He gestured at the estate around them. 12 years ago, my family was murdered in this house. My parents, my younger sister, my uncle. I was in the city that night, meeting with distributors for my father's wine business. His voice remained level, controlled. By the time I returned, they were dead. Shot execution style in the living room while they were having dinner. Elena's appetite vanished. "Luciano." The police investigated. They found nothing. No suspects, no motives, no justice. He picked up his wine again, studying the dark liquid. "So I built my own justice system. Took control of my father's businesses, the legitimate ones and the ones he'd kept hidden from me. Made alliances, eliminated enemies, grew strong enough that no one would ever dare touch what was mine again." "Did you find them? The people who killed your family?" "Most of them. The ones who pulled the triggers, the ones who gave the orders." His eyes met hers across the table. "Justice, Miss Torres, doesn't exist in courtrooms. It exists where we make it." The waves crashed against the rocks below. Elena thought about her father dead from a heart attack when she was 16, sudden and senseless. She thought about how much she'd wanted someone to blame, something to punish for taking him away. "Is that why you do all of this?" she asked. "For justice?" "No. I do this because it's who I am now. The justice was just the beginning." He stood, moving to the terrace railing. "But I wanted you to understand. You work for me. You live in my house. You're part of my world now. And my world was built on blood and necessity." Elena joined him at the railing, looking out at the dark ocean. "Why does it matter if I understand?" "Because you have something my world doesn't have." He turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not power or calculation, but a kind of desperate honesty. "You still believe there's a difference between what's legal and what's right. You still have morals that aren't negotiable. And that's useful to you how?" "It's not useful, it's..." He paused, seeming to search for the word. "Anchoring. You remind me that there are people who still live in the light." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This was the man who controlled a criminal empire, who had people killed with a phone call, who moved through the world as if laws were suggestions. And he was telling her that she, powerless, trapped Elena Torres, anchored him somehow. "You scare me," she admitted. "I know, but sometimes..." She trailed off, not sure how to finish. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes I think you're more alone than I am." Luciano's expression shifted, surprise flashing across his features before the mask of control returned. But for that moment, Elena had seen beneath it. Had seen the man who'd lost his entire family in one night of violence, who'd built an empire to fill the absence they'd left. He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jawline, barely a touch, more like the promise of one. Elena's breath caught. This was dangerous in a different way than the business dealings and late-night meetings. This was personal. "You should go back to the city," he said, dropping his hand. "Vincent will drive you." "What about you?" "I'll stay here tonight. I don't come here often enough." To the place where his family died. Elena understood this house was a monument and a wound, something he couldn't escape but couldn't bear to occupy. In the car, with Vincent driving and the estate disappearing behind them, Elena touched her jaw where Luciano's fingers had traced. She could still feel the ghost of that contact, could still see the loneliness in his eyes. She was falling, she realized. Not in love, nothing so simple, but into some complicated orbit around a man who was both captor and captive, monster and mourner. And the most terrifying part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to escape anymore. Elena visited her mother every weekend, driven by Vincent in a black SUV that felt like a mobile fortress. Her mother had improved remarkably. The experimental treatment was working, color returning to her cheeks, strength to her voice. They sat in the facility's garden, autumn sun warm on their faces, and talked about everything except Luciano De Luca. "You look tired, Mija," her mother said, studying her face. "I'm fine. Just busy." "Busy with what? You never talk about your work." I signed an NDA. I can't discuss details. Her mother's expression tightened. What kind of businessman makes his assistant sign an NDA? The kind who runs a criminal empire. Elena thought but didn't say. A private one. They sat in silence for a moment. Then her mother said, very quietly, DeLuca. That name sounds familiar. Elena's stomach dropped. What do you mean? Your father. Before he died, he mentioned that name. I didn't think anything of it at the time, but her mother's hands twisted in her lap. He borrowed money once, when we were struggling. He wouldn't tell me from who, but I remember seeing a paper on his desk, a contract or something. The name DeLuca was on it. The garden seemed to tilt. Papa borrowed money from Luciano's family? I don't know for certain. But Elena, if it's the same family... Her mother grabbed her hand. There were rumors about the loan sharks in the Italian district. People who lent money and expected payment in ways that weren't just financial. When did Papa die? 12 years ago. You remember the heart attack? 12 years ago. The same year Luciano's family was murdered. Elena's mind raced. Her father dead from a sudden heart attack that everyone accepted at face value because he'd had high blood pressure. Luciano's family murdered the same year. It could be coincidence. But in Luciano's world, Elena was learning. There were no coincidences. That night, back at the penthouse, Elena couldn't settle. She paced her room, mind churning through possibilities. If her father had owed money to the DeLuca family, if he'd been somehow involved in their world, she needed to know. The penthouse had a library, a room Elena rarely entered because Luciano used it as a secondary office. But he was out tonight, at a meeting that Vincent had said would last until late. Elena slipped into the library, heart hammering. She didn't know what she was looking for. Files, maybe. Records. Anything that might connect her father to Luciano's past. The desk was locked, but the bookshelves held more than books. Elena found a box behind a row of leather-bound volumes. The kind of box designed to look decorative, but actually secure. It opened easily. Inside were folders, organized by year. She found 2013 12 years ago and pulled it out. Inside were newspaper clippings about the DeLuca family murders. Photos of Luciano's parents, his sister Maria, who'd been only 14. And beneath those, financial records. Her father's name was on one of the documents. Isaac Torres. Loan amount, $50,000. Date, March 2013. Collateral, none listed. Elena's hands shook as she read. Her father had borrowed money from the DeLuca family 6 months before they were murdered. The loan had been marked paid in full in September 2013, the month after the murders. The month after her father's heart attack. Looking for something? Elena spun around. Luciano stood in the doorway, still in his coat, eyes unreadable. No excuses came. She held up the document. My father. He borrowed money from your family. Luciano moved into the room with that predatory calm she'd learned to recognize. Yes. Did you know, when you hired me? Yes. The confirmation hit like a physical blow. Was my father, did he have anything to do with your family's death? No. Luciano took the document from her hands, studied it. Your father borrowed money to pay for your mother's medical bills, a surgery she needed. He paid it back by working off the debt. Security work, deliveries. He was clean, Miss Torres, not involved in the violence. Then why did he die the same month? Because sometimes God or fate or whatever you believe in has a cruel sense of timing. Your father had a heart condition. The stress of working 2 jobs killed him. Luciano's voice was gentle but firm. I looked into it extensively when I was investigating everyone connected to my family's death. Your father wasn't involved. Elena sank into a chair, overwhelmed. But you knew. You knew this whole time, and you still hired me. I hired you because you were clean. Because your father proved that people from the light could work with my family without becoming corrupted. He crouched in front of her, bringing his eyes level with hers. I hired you because I needed someone like your father, someone trustworthy, and he was already gone. So I'm a replacement. No. You're a choice I made knowing the full history. Your father never knew what my family really did. I'm not giving you that kindness. You see exactly who I am. Why? Because I wanted you to choose this with open eyes. Elena met his gaze, saw the terrible honesty there. He'd brought her into his world knowing she had a tenuous connection to his past, knowing she was desperate enough to accept, knowing she would eventually uncover this truth. Did you kill him? The The question came out as a whisper. No. Simple, direct. But if you need someone to blame for your father's death, I understand why you'd choose me. My family's debt literally and figuratively contributed to the stress that killed him. Elena thought about her father, about the extra shifts he'd worked that last year, about how tired he'd looked, how he'd waved off her mother's concerns. He'd been killing himself to save her mother, and in doing so, had become entangled with the DeLuca family. I don't know if I can do this anymore, she said. Yes, you can. Because your mother is alive because of the choice you made. Because 3 months ago you decided that her life was worth more than your comfort, your morals, your safety. Luciano stood. That calculation hasn't changed. He was right. God, he was right, and she hated him for it. But beneath the hate was something more complicated understanding, perhaps, or recognition. They were both people who'd lost someone they loved, who'd had to make impossible choices in the aftermath. I need time, she said. Take the weekend. Vincent will drive you to your apartment. You can stay there. Think. Decide if you want to continue. And if I decide I don't? Luciano's expression was unreadable. Then I'll release you from your contract. Your mother's treatment will continue to be covered. I don't punish people for choosing to leave, only for betraying me. He moved to the door, paused. But Elena, if you leave, stay gone. Don't try to expose me. Don't try to be a hero. Just live your life in the light and forget you ever knew me. After he left, Elena sat in the library surrounded by the evidence of interconnected pasts, trying to decide who she was and what she could live with. The answer, she was learning, was more complicated than she'd ever imagined. Elena spent the weekend in her old studio apartment, surrounded by the life she'd had before Luciano DeLuca. The furniture looked shabbier than she remembered, the walls more stained. After months in the penthouse, this place felt like someone else's memory. She visited her mother, told her everything. Not the details of Luciano's businesses, she wasn't foolish enough to put that burden on her mother, but the connection between their families, the complexity of her position. Her mother listened, then said something Elena didn't expect. You're already in too deep to leave safely. What? Mija, I didn't spend 50 years in this city being naive. Men like your employer, they don't let people walk away clean. Either you're inside or you're a threat. There's no neutral ground. So I should stay? I think you've already decided to stay. You're just looking for permission to stop feeling guilty about it. Her mother was right. Elena had known, even as she'd left the penthouse, that she wasn't really leaving. She'd seen too much, knew too much, and despite everything, she understood Luciano in a way that felt dangerously close to caring. Monday morning, she returned to the penthouse. Luciano was in his office, reviewing documents. He looked up as she entered, expression carefully neutral. I'm staying, Elena said. Something shifted in his eyes, relief maybe, or satisfaction. Good. But I need to know something. Did you choose me just because of my father's connection? No. I chose you because you were competent, desperate, and clean. The connection to your father was confirmation that people from your world could work with mine. He set down his pen. But if I'm being completely honest, yes, it was part of the appeal. Your father proved himself trustworthy. I hoped you'd inherited that quality. And have I? You're still here, aren't you? Despite knowing the truth. That's more trustworthy than most people I've worked with. Elena moved further into the room. I need conditions. Name them. I want to know the truth about what you do. Not the sanitized version. If I'm complicit, I want to understand what I'm complicit in. Luciano studied her for a long moment. That's not a condition that benefits you. Maybe not, but I need it anyway. Very well. What else? I want Sundays completely off. No calls, no emergencies unless it's life or death. I need time that's mine. Agreed. And I want to be able to leave. Eventually. When my mother is stable, when I've saved enough money, I want to know that there's an exit. There's always an exit, Miss Torres. But some exits cost more than others. He stood, moved around the desk. I'll agree to this. Work for me for 3 years. At the end, if you want to leave, I'll facilitate it. New identity if you want one, relocation expenses, enough money to start over. But you can never return to Verona Bay, and you can never speak about anything you've learned. 3 years. It felt both like forever and not long enough. Deal, Elena said. Luciano extended his hand. After a moment, Elena took it. His grip was firm, warm, a human connection in the midst of negotiation. Welcome to the darkness, Miss Torres, he said softly. I promise not to let you drown in it. Over the following months, Luciano kept his word. He showed her the real structure of his empire, the legitimate businesses that laundered money, the network of bribes that kept officials looking the other way, the violence that was sometimes necessary to maintain control. Elena learned how to read the ledgers that tracked both legal and illegal revenue. She learned the names and faces of Luciano's allies and enemies. She learned which questions to ask in meetings and which to save for private moments. She also learned that Luciano's empire, while built on crime, operated with its own moral code. He didn't traffic in drugs that destroyed communities, didn't touch weapons that would be used in schools or public spaces, refused contracts that involved children. There were lines he wouldn't cross, principles that guided even his darkest decisions. "You're surprised," he said one night. They were reviewing shipping manifests imports that were legal on paper but facilitated illegal activities. "I expected worse, I think. There's plenty that's worse if you know where to look. But I learned from my father's mistakes." Luciano closed the laptop. He had no boundaries. Worked with anyone who could pay. Facilitated anything that generated profit. That lack of discipline made enemies. And enemies. He trailed off, but Elena understood. Enemies murdered your family. As Elena learned the business, she also learned Luciano. His habits, his tells, the way his mood shifted based on conversations she wasn't privy to. She learned that he was harder on himself than anyone else, that the empire he'd built was both throne and prison. She learned that he watched her in unguarded moments, and that sometimes his expression held something that looked almost like longing. They never discussed the almost touch on the terrace at his estate. Never acknowledged the tension that had built between them, the way conversations sometimes trailed into silence charged with things unsaid. But Elena felt it, in the way his hand lingered at her back when they walked into meetings, in the way he sought her opinion on decisions that had nothing to do with her role. In the late-night moments when they worked side by side in his office, the city dark below them, and she'd look up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name. She was in the cage still, but the bars had become more comfortable, and her captor had become something more complicated than an enemy. Vincent noticed. "You're good for him," he said one afternoon when he was driving her to visit her mother. "I work for him, that's all. If you believe that, you're not as smart as I thought." Elena didn't respond, because what could she say? That she'd started to care about a man who operated outside all moral boundaries she'd been raised with? That sometimes she wondered what it would be like if they'd met in different circumstances, in a world where he was just a businessman and she was just a woman, and neither carried the weight of their respective histories? It was a fantasy. Their reality was what it was. But fantasies, Elena was learning, could be dangerous in their own way. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Elena was in Luciano's office, organizing files, when Vincent entered with an expression she'd learned to recognize. Something was wrong. "We have a situation," Vincent said, and Luciano's entire demeanor shifted from the man reviewing contracts to the one who commanded an empire. "Explain." "Marco Vega. He's been talking to the FBI. We have confirmation." The name meant nothing to Elena, but Luciano's reaction told her everything. His jaw tightened, hands stilling on the desk. "How long?" "At least 3 months, maybe longer." Marco Vega, Elena learned as they drove to a warehouse on the waterfront, had been one of Luciano's lieutenants. Trusted with running the port operations, with managing relationships with corrupt customs officials, and he'd been selling information to federal agents building a racketeering case. The warehouse was cavernous and cold, dim except for lights hung over a chair in the center where a man sat bound. Even from a distance, Elena could see he was terrified. "You shouldn't be here," Luciano said, but he didn't send her away. Elena watched as Luciano approached Marco Vega. No anger in his movements, no rage, just that terrible calm she'd come to recognize. "You know why you're here," Luciano said. "I didn't," Marco started, but Luciano held up a hand. "Don't insult me with lies. We have recordings of your meetings with Agent Brennan. We know what you told them." Luciano crouched to be at eye level with Marco. "What I want to understand is why. They had evidence. About the shipping routes. They were going to arrest my wife, my kids." Marco's voice broke. "They said if I cooperated, they'd leave my family alone." Elena's chest tightened. This man had betrayed Luciano to protect his family. Wasn't that exactly what she'd do in his position? Wasn't that what she was doing now, compromising her morals to save her mother? "Your family," Luciano repeated softly. "So, you decided to destroy my organization, my people to save yours." I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You made yours. Luciano stood, moved away. He caught Elena's eyes across the warehouse, and in his gaze she saw a question. Do you understand now? This is what I am. This is what my world requires. Marco was crying now, pleading. Vincent stood nearby, hand inside his jacket where Elena knew he kept a gun. Please, Marco begged. Please, I have kids. So did my sister, Luciano said quietly. She was 14. Do you know what they did to her before they killed her? I can describe it in detail if you'd like. The warehouse fell silent except for Marco's sobbing. Luciano turned to Elena. You wanted to understand what I do. This is it. This is justice in my world. He pulled out a gun. Elena hadn't even realized he'd brought one. This man betrayed me, put everyone in my organization at risk. In doing so, he committed the one sin I can't forgive. He held the gun out to Elena. You have a choice. You can do this or I can do this. Either way, Marco Vega doesn't leave here alive. Elena stared at the weapon, her entire body frozen. I can't. Yes, you can, or you can't. That's what choice means. His voice was still gentle, still calm. But understand, if you can't do this, you need to accept that I can. That I will, and you'll stay in my world knowing what that means. Her hands shook as she took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold metal against her palm. She looked at Marco, at his fear, his desperation, his humanity. She thought about her father, working himself to death to save her mother. About the choices people made when backed into corners. About the difference between justice and vengeance and whether that difference even mattered. I can't, she whispered, handing the gun back. Luciano took it without comment. He walked to Marco, placed the barrel against the man's temple. Close your eyes, he told Elena. She did, but she heard the shot, heard the body fall, heard the terrible silence that followed. When she opened her eyes, Luciano was standing over Marco's body, expression empty. He handed the gun to Vincent, then turned to Elena. Now you know, he said. Now you understand completely. In the car, Elena couldn't stop shaking. Luciano sat beside her in the back while Vincent drove, not speaking, not touching her, just present. He had children, Elena finally said. Yes, they'll be provided for. Anonymous trust fund, enough to see them through college and beyond. Luciano's voice was flat. I don't punish families for individual betrayals. That doesn't make it better. No, it doesn't. They reached the penthouse. Elena went to her room, locked the door, and stood in the shower until the water ran cold. She scrubbed her skin raw, but couldn't wash away the sound of the gunshot, the image of Marco's fear. Luciano knocked on her door hours later. She almost didn't answer, but finally opened it to find him still in the same clothes, looking older than she'd ever seen him. I won't apologize, he said, for what I am or what I did. I don't expect you to, but I am sorry you had to see it. I should have sent you away. Elena leaned against the doorframe, exhausted beyond measure. Why didn't you? Because you asked to know the truth. And the truth is that sometimes I have to do monstrous things. I wanted you to see it, to really see it, and then decide if you could still. He paused. If you could still stand to be in the same room as me. Can I leave? Elena asked. Not meaning the job, meaning right now, this moment. Could she walk away from him after watching him kill someone? Yes, always yes. But Elena didn't move. Because she'd seen something else in that warehouse. She'd seen Luciano's face when Marco talked about his children. Had seen the flash of pain before the mask returned. He wasn't killing out of rage or enjoyment. He was killing because in his world, betrayal meant death. Because his empire survived only through the enforcement of brutal rules. He was a monster. But he was a monster made by circumstance and tragedy, shaped by the same forces that had shaped her grief and desperation, and the willingness to do terrible things for the people you love. I'm not leaving, Elena said. Relief flooded Luciano's features. Elena, but don't ask me to watch again. Don't make me complicit in that way. I'll stay, I'll work, I'll keep your secrets, but I can't witness the violence. I won't. I promise. He reached for her hand, held it gently. His fingers were warm, steady, so normal for someone who'd just killed a man. Elena realized they'd crossed some invisible boundary. They weren't employer and employee anymore. They were two people in orbit around each other, bound by secrets and choices and a connection that shouldn't exist but did anyway. You should rest, Luciano said. So should you. I don't sleep well on nights like this. Neither will I. They stood there, hands linked, neither moving. Then Luciano pulled her gently into an embrace. Elena went, pressing her face against his chest, hearing his heartbeat steady, human, alive. They stayed like that for a long time, two people holding each other in the aftermath of violence, finding comfort in the darkness they'd both chosen to inhabit. 3 days after the warehouse, FBI agents appeared at one of Luciano's legitimate businesses, a restaurant downtown. They had warrants, questions, a confident swagger that said they thought they had him. Elena watched from the penthouse as Luciano took the call from his lawyers, his expression giving nothing away. When he hung up, he turned to her. It's starting. Marco gave them enough to build a case, and they're moving on it now. What happens? We prepare. The lawyers handle the immediate crisis, but I need to clean things up on my end. Connections that can't withstand scrutiny need to be severed. Evidence needs to disappear. People need to become unavailable. Over the next weeks, Elena saw the machine of Luciano's empire shift into defensive mode. Money moved through even more complex channels. People who might talk were either bribed into silence or threatened into it. Documents were destroyed, digital trails erased. Luciano worked 18-hour days, sleeping in his office more often than his bed. Vincent coordinated with enforcers throughout the city. The penthouse became a war room. Elena found herself at the center of it all, managing schedules, coordinating communication, tracking the moving pieces. She'd never felt more essential to Luciano's operation, which meant she'd never been more complicit. One night, very late, she found Luciano on the terrace overlooking the city. He held a glass of whiskey but wasn't drinking it. "Can't sleep?" she asked, echoing his words to her from months ago. Too much to think about. Elena joined him at the railing. The city sprawled below, beautiful and corrupt in equal measure. Will they arrest you? They'll try. Whether they succeed depends on how good my lawyers are and how much evidence they actually have. He finally took a sip of whiskey. Marco knew a lot, but he didn't know everything. He can connect me to tax evasion, fraud, probably money laundering, but not to the violence. That was kept separate. So you might just go to prison for white-collar crimes instead of murder. That was always the plan. Build the legitimate businesses large enough that if the illegal operations get exposed, I can retreat behind them. Take a few years in minimum security. Come out still powerful. Luciano glanced at her. It's a failure, but a survivable one. That's what you call going to prison? Survivable? In my world, survival is the only victory that matters. Elena thought about the people she'd met over the months, the ones who'd disappeared, the ones who'd ended up in hospitals or worse. Survival in Luciano's world came at steep prices. What happens to me if you're arrested? You'll be questioned, possibly offered immunity if you testify against me. His jaw tightened. I won't ask you to lie for me. If they pressure you, tell them what they want to hear. And go to prison for perjury when they realize I knew more than I said? I'll make sure you don't. I have lawyers ready to represent you, character witnesses lined up. You'll walk away clean. You've planned for this. I plan for everything. Elena turned to face him fully. I don't want to walk away clean while you go to prison. Something shifted in Luciano's expression. Surprise. Then something warmer. Elena, I chose this. All of it. If there are consequences, I'll face them. No. His voice was firm. You got into this for your mother. You stayed because I didn't give you real alternatives. But I won't let you go down with me. You can't control everything. Watch me. They stared at each other, locked in a battle of wills. Then Luciano did something unexpected. He smiled. A real smile, not the calculated expressions he used in negotiations. You're stubborn. So are you. It's one of the things I admire about you. The word hung in the air between them. Admire. Such a careful choice, when Elena could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing against the boundaries they'd maintained. Luciano. She started, then stopped, not sure what she meant to say. He set down his glass, moved closer. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the subtle spice of his cologne. I should send you away, right now, before this gets worse. Give you money, new identity, set you up somewhere safe. But you won't. No, because I'm selfish. Because having you here makes this bearable. His hand came up, fingers tracing her jawline like they had once before on a different terrace. Because somewhere in the last year, You stopped being just my assistant and became... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Elena understood. She kissed him. It was impulsive. Probably foolish. Definitely crossing a line they couldn't uncross. But his lips were warm, and his hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness, and for a moment, Elena forgot about FBI investigations and criminal empires and moral compromises. When they broke apart, Luciano rested his forehead against hers. That complicates things. Everything's already complicated. Fair point. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I can't offer you a normal life. I can't promise you safety or simplicity or any of the things you deserve. I stopped expecting those things a long time ago. But I can promise you honesty. Whatever happens with the investigation, with my empire, with us, I won't lie to you. That's more than most people offer. They stood there, wrapped in the reality of what they'd just acknowledged. Whatever this was between them, affection, attraction, the bond formed by shared darkness, it was real now. Undeniable. The investigation continued. The FBI built their case, and Elena and Luciano navigated the escalating crisis while navigating the new territory of whatever they were to each other. Some nights he came to her room, and they talked until dawn about everything except the future. Some nights she found him in his office, shoulders tight with stress, and she'd massage the tension away without words. They didn't rush, didn't push, just let whatever was growing between them develop in the spaces between the chaos. Vincent, predictably, had opinions. You know this is insane, he said one day. Which part? All of it. But especially the part where you're falling for the boss. I'm not. Please. I've known Luciano for 20 years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. And you look at him the same way. Vincent's expression softened. Just be careful. Men like us, we destroy things. It's what we do. Even when we don't mean to. Elena thought about Marco Vega, about all the people who'd crossed Luciano and paid the price. Vincent was right, this was insane. But sanity was a luxury she'd given up a long time ago. The FBI arrested Luciano on a Wednesday morning. Elena was there when they came a coordinated raid. Agents flooding the penthouse with weapons drawn and warrants raised. They put Luciano in handcuffs while reading his rights, their voices echoing in the space that had been her home for over a year. He caught her eyes as they led him out, and in that look she saw everything. Trust, regret, determination. She wanted to scream at them, to demand they let him go, but she stood silent, hands clenched, as they took him away. The agents questioned her for 6 hours. She told them the truth about her role: assistant, organizer, facilitator. She didn't lie about what she'd seen or heard, but she also didn't volunteer the details that would cement their case, didn't offer the connections they hadn't made themselves. They offered her immunity. She declined, saying she'd done nothing that required immunity. It was a gamble the kind Luciano would make. When they finally released her, Vincent was waiting outside. He wants you to leave the city, Vincent said. Go somewhere safe until this settles. What about you? I'm staying. Someone needs to keep things running. Elena thought about it, really thought about it. She could take the money she'd saved, disappear into a new life. Her mother was stable, the treatment working. She could be free. But freedom, she'd learned, was more complicated than just physical distance. Her heart was here, tangled up with a man who was currently in a federal holding cell. Her life was here, in this dark and complicated world she'd made peace with. I'm staying too, Elena said. Over the following weeks, she became a regular fixture at the courthouse, sitting behind Luciano during hearings. His lawyers were brilliant, expensive sharks who tore apart the prosecution's case piece by piece. The evidence was circumstantial, they argued. Marco Vega was a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. The financial irregularities were accounting errors, not money laundering. It was all theater, Elena knew. But theater could be effective. During one recess, Luciano's lawyer arranged a brief meeting. They sat across from each other in a windowless room, a guard watching from the corner. You shouldn't be here, Luciano said. It associates you with me publicly. I'm already associated with you. Not in the way the media will see it if you keep showing up. Elena leaned forward. I don't care what the media thinks. I care what happens to you. Then you understand why I'm here. Luciano's expression softened as much as it could in this harsh fluorescent lighting, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his tailored suits. When this is over, it's not over yet. Let's focus on getting through it first. The trial lasted 3 months. Elena watched as prosecutors presented evidence and witnesses, watched as Luciano's lawyers dismantled their case with precision, watched as Luciano himself remained calm, controlled, every inch the legitimate businessman they were claiming he was. The jury deliberated for 2 weeks. Not guilty on the racketeering charges, not guilty on money laundering, guilty on tax evasion and financial fraud crimes that carried sentences, but not the life imprisonment the prosecution had sought. Luciano was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Elena stood in the courtroom as the judge read the sentence, feeling the weight of those years settle over her. 4 years. Not forever, but a significant portion of her life. Luciano turned to look at her before they led him away. In his eyes she saw relief. Relief that it wasn't worse, that his empire would survive, that she was there. She mouthed, "I'll wait." He smiled a real smile, warm despite everything. Then they took him away. Elena walked out of the courthouse into gray afternoon light. Vincent fell into step beside her. "What now?" he asked. "Now I help keep things running until he gets back." "That's not what I meant." Elena stopped, turned to face him. "I know what you meant, and the answer is, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I should leave and start over somewhere else. But I choose this. I choose him. Knowing everything I know, seeing everything I've seen, I choose this." Vincent studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "He's lucky to have you. I'm lucky too. I just wish I understood why. Love doesn't always make sense." Elena blinked. "Love? What else would you call it? You stayed through the darkness. You're planning to wait 4 years for a man who might come out of prison even more damaged than he went in. That's not admiration or attraction or obligation. That's love." The word felt too large, too simple for what Elena felt. But maybe Vincent was right. Maybe all the complexity, all the moral compromises and shared secrets and moments of connection in the dark, maybe that was just what love looked like in a world like theirs. The months after Luciano's imprisonment were strange. Elena moved into the estate on the cliff, the place where his family had died and where he rarely stayed. She couldn't bear to be in the penthouse without him, couldn't sleep in her room knowing he was in a cell. She worked with Vincent to maintain the legitimate businesses. The illegal operations had been largely dismantled during the trial, Luciano's way of ensuring the empire could survive his absence. What remained was legal, if not entirely ethical. She visited Luciano every week. They talked through reinforced glass about mundane things, how the businesses were performing, what she was reading, what the ocean looked like from the estate. They didn't talk about the future, about what would happen when he was released. That felt too raw, too uncertain. But gradually, Elena built a life in the waiting. She took online classes, finally using her social work degree to volunteer at a youth center. She learned to cook from Rosa, who still came to the estate weekly. She watched sunsets over the ocean and thought about redemption and whether it was possible for people like them. One night, unable to sleep, she explored the estate more thoroughly. In a locked room, she found photographs of the De Luca family before tragedy. Luciano as a young man, smiling beside his sister. His parents, dignified and warm. A whole life that had been destroyed in one night of violence. Elena understood then why Luciano had become what he was. Not to justify it, but to understand it. He'd built an empire on the ruins of his family because it was the only way to make sense of senseless loss. Because power meant no one could hurt him again. Because justice in courtrooms had failed him. So he'd created his own. She sat among those photographs and cried for the family that had been lost. For the man Luciano might have been in a different world. For the woman she'd been before desperation had led her through the doors of the sapphire room. When she visited Luciano the following week, she told him about finding the photographs. "I should have hidden those," he said through the glass. "No, I needed to see them. To understand who you were before all of this. That person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe not, but pieces of him are still there. I see them sometimes, when you think no one's looking." Luciano placed his hand flat against the glass. Elena matched it with her own, separated by barriers but connected nonetheless. "I love you," she said. The words came out simple, declarative. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe gradually, maybe all at once. But I love you, and I'm going to wait for you, and when you get out we'll figure out what comes next." For a long moment Luciano couldn't speak. Then, "You shouldn't love someone like me." "Probably not, but I do anyway." "Elena," his voice broke, "I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." You don't have to be worthy. You just have to be honest. That was always the deal. They sat there, hands pressed to opposite sides of the glass, until the guard announced visiting hours were over. 3.5 years later, Elena stood outside the federal prison as Luciano walked through the gates. He looked older. Harder prison had left its marks. But when he saw her, his face transformed with a smile that erased years. "You waited," he said, as if surprised despite everything. "I said I would." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I have a lot to make up for. We both do. We'll figure it out together." They drove to the estate as dawn broke over Verona Bay, light spilling across the water in shades of gold and amber. The same dawn that had witnessed violence and loss and compromise was now witnessing something else. Not redemption exactly, but possibility. Elena thought about the journey that had brought her here. Desperation, fear, moral compromise, and ultimately choice. She'd chosen this man, this life, knowing all its darkness. And he'd chosen her back, seeing in her something worth protecting even at the cost of his carefully constructed control. They weren't innocent. They probably never would be again. But they were honest with each other, and that was its own kind of grace. As they stood on the terrace overlooking the ocean, Luciano wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What now?" he asked. "Now we build something new. Something that's ours, not defined by the past or the empire or what we've lost." Elena leaned back against him. "Now we see if two people from the darkness can find their way to something like light. That's ambitious. We've always been ambitious." Luciano pressed a kiss to her temple, gentle and full of promise. "Together, then, whatever comes next." Together, Elena agreed. The sun rose higher, burning away the shadows, and they stood in its warmth, two imperfect people choosing each other despite everything, building their future on foundations of truth and shared darkness, and the kind of love that survives when everything else burns away.